this task, they really try to bring that together and also to come forward with the first sets of weather data files that were created quite consistently, meaning that they used a similar model behind, looked at similar time frames, and could start also to compare across countries and across locations, knowing that the mistakes that might be in their climate data are also consistent across those locations, so that you can actually start to pinpoint into differences in impact due to location, and that you should not question whether there are certain mistakes in that one model that's one used for one location, but a completely different model was used for another location, which might have other issues ongoing. That's what they tried to do here, and came up with weather data files for 15 locations. The aim will be in an assignment that these might also be used by you, but I've heard now where you're all from, and that might be a bit of a challenge, so we will have to see how we will figure that out, but that's a concern for next week. But it also highlights that it's not possible today as an architect or as an engineer to just go somewhere and take a weather file for that scenario in that location. We're not that far yet. We have seen a tremendous evolution in what is available today to use, but it's not that easy yet. We also see that, for example, there are a lot, and it's also represented here, a lot of models and work done across Europe, but there are other regions, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, where we have there's just very few models and very few work done there, and you cannot just take one module and put it over a different area, because there are completely different mechanisms playing their roles in different regions. Let's get this one. What I haven't addressed yet is how cities are represented in these modules. And also there is a broad range of how refined you can include cities in those models. And similarly, the more refined you include it in your model, the more computational resources you will need to simulate it. So you could go from a very simple tile approach, where you just say, okay, this is a city, so I kind of assume that it's kind of a rock surface, which represents the fact that it holds heat and releases, so that's a very simple representation. You could add some more resistance elements in it, and you could further refine it till you end up somewhere here on the upper right, where you even kind of your city, you define that into very small grid boxes and start calculating all physical processes in there. Of course, if you look at global warming impact based on a module that uses this approach or that approach, then you can be quite sure, if you would compare with observations, that in this case you will have a way more accurate representation compared to that one. But then again, it depends on the goal, what you are using weather data or climate data for, what is actually a good estimate. So if you want to come up with weather data, and that's for example what I did in my PhD, to be able to simulate buildings here in Belgium, then you do not need this detailed representation. We used something that is more in line with this one. Then you kind of get files that you know that they handle the urban impacts, but not necessarily very detailed microclimate aspects that are ongoing, because that's just not needed to know how, or not an added value to know how your energy demands might change. So we used a more simplified one, where we actually had a parameterization into the model, which is at lower computational cost, and which allowed us to have weather data in this temporal and spatial resolution. So we have hourly temperature evolutions for a long time period with a spatial resolution about 3 kilometers. So that makes it different. If I want to see how the energy demand of a building in the city center of Leuven evolves compared to one in the suburbs, then this model upset for me was completely fine to kind of get that information. If I would want to see in the city of Brussels what the impact is of a building or even of thermal comfort, outdoor thermal comfort for people close to a big park or on the mean square of Brussels, then this would not be sufficient enough. So there you would need a more refined model to take that into account. In the past 5 years, there have become a lot of urban climate modeling tools available. One that is very interesting in the sense for urban designers, for architects to use is this URCLIM tool. Why? It's a model that allows you to run simulations across the globe. They have a representation of cities, but they did it in a more simplified way, which allows to get quite accurate data with what they have shown in validations on a quite high resolution. So here you see on the right-hand side that they have hourly gridded data on a 100-meter resolution. That's extremely refined in spatial resolution, but still at a computational cost that is quite feasible, and also if we would want to get that data is within an accessible range of costs, financial costs to get the data. They use it to, for example, look at heat stress modeling even on meter scales, and I will show you some of them in the upcoming course. They have also used it, and it's unfortunately only a tool that is available at this point for Flanders even, but they allow to select a location in Flanders where you could then see first what is the impact of climate change on that specific location. But then in the next step, you could start and draw in your master plan of your design in it and see, okay, I will increase the built area of this amount. You can really draw the buildings in there, but I will also provide additional vegetation, or I will include a blue body. You can draw it in, and then you can see how that reduces, in this case, the impact of climate change on the site you are working on. I think it's their aim to allow also something like that on a more global scale. They have implemented it in certain studies, but then again you see that now popping up for limited cities across the world, but they are working on that and expanding that. So I think that might be one of, a tool that might be of interest in upcoming years. Of course, this is one. There will be a whole set of other tools upcoming, which might be of use for the region you are working in. So that's always a bit of a search. What is available for your region, and what are the needs you have to look at. So they now also have, and that's launched last month, the Urban Climate Simulator, which uses this URCLIM model, and where you can select a certain area across the globe, where you can then ask them to run those simulations, and then you get data out of the 100-meter simulation. Of course, it's not free, unfortunately, because of the computational cost, but I think it's the first important step to move forward, and I would hope that with the years to come, we will see more and more data becoming available to be used in urban design as well. Another example of a modeling tool is one of the University of Berkeley. It's CityBES. It's a bit of a different model in the sense that they really start more from that urban design perspective, where you could then add weather data for one location, and then you actually see how the city impacts that weather data. So it's a bit of a similar way as what we have with the dynamical downscaling. You give it a certain boundary condition, and then you let the city do its work, and you see where temperatures during the day increase, or where you have cool items popping up based on your building configuration. So they use it for energy benchmarking, but they also already use it now for leak resilience modeling, energy retrofit analysis. So there's a broad range of possible uses. To conclude the theoretical part, and I hope I haven't lost too many people by now. First of all, are there things that are unclear or that are everyone is still okay? As a conclusion, I think if you, as an architect, as an urban designer, if you are looking into a certain design question and you want to look at, okay, what might future climates mean to this design, to the city, whatever, and you look at the data that might be available for your region, then it's important to consider whether it's based on a model and you know, okay, physical processes fully represented, or whether there's a more statistical method used where you might have some inconsistencies. It's important to see also the spatial and the temporal resolution. You will have data across the globe for every 6 or daily resolution and at 200 kilometer scale, but that will not be the data that is of big use for what typically we are doing in our field. So you would have to look for a temporal and a spatial resolution that is quite in line with what you would need. It might, of course, sometimes mean that you don't have a full representation, but then at least you know what trends you might expect for certain areas. But that's an important one to keep in mind. Linked to that, the location of the data. So whether it's a rural spot or it's an urban spot, and linked also again with the project. Reference period is also an important one. Weather data that is typically available for building simulations today for the current climate. It's not really the current climate in some cases, it's sometimes end of last century. For example, if you look at the energy regulations in Belgium, they still use weather data representing the periods 1970s to 2000. Temperatures have risen since then, but that's still used for our energy calculation methodology. So that's something to be aware of. For sure, if we then look at, okay, we see a 1.5 increase in global warming. Is that compared to pre-industrial time, or is that compared to end of the 20th century? So that's something to be aware of when you start using that data. And then the last one is which climate weather conditions are represented. Are you looking at typical conditions? Are you looking at extreme conditions? What do you need, and what do you get in the data set you get? For the last part, I would like to already look at the assignment for this module. As I said, it will be the use of a number of tools, I'm afraid. Because of the fact what is available today regarding weather data, and I was looking for something that could at least give us something to consistent look at with the group across the world, but it means that certain tools will not have impact for certain locations, and then we'll see how we will solve that. We will look at climate change impact more on a country level, and there I expect that everyone should still be fine. Second step is to look more at an urban risk impact, and that's more on city level, where there might be a need to look to a city close to the city you investigated in the previous model. Third part is about the impact of thermal comfort, for which it would be great to look into those Annex 80 weather files, but as you've seen, they are only available for 16 cities. So we will have to see how we do that. And then the last part is rather a more reflection, as there is a tool available for Flanders where you could kind of see, okay, this building in this region, and if we adapt certain things in the urban design, this would be the impact. That's not available on a global level. So for the last part, I would want you to really reflect upon the urban area that your building is located in, and to see what might work in your case and what might not, and then actually more in the text reflection write some suggestions down. I'll show the first two today, and then the other two aspects will be discussed next week. For the first one, the climate change impact, we will use the Climate Impact Explorer. This is developed by Climate Analytics, and it's part of a bigger project that got funded by ClimateWorks Foundation and also Bloomberg Philanthropies, where they grouped a set of climate models together to kind of, for different countries and for different indicators, different scenarios, look into what climate change would mean. I will show you the example for Lisbon, so the capital of Portugal. You'll see in the interface of the Climate Explorer that you can select the country you are looking at, as well as the province, so that's the second part, as well as then your indicator and your scenario. The province might not always be possible to select depending on the country, so it might be that in certain cases you would have to stop on the selection of the country. That will be something to see. That doesn't make a big difference here either. Your first scenario, you will always select the RCP 8.5 scenario, and then we will add a less, more optimistic scenario to compare. So to compare, so once you have selected your country, if possible a province, your indicator and your scenario, then you can add an alternative scenario, and there you can then select the RCP 2.6 scenario. That kind of gives us in the analysis a bit of the range what you could expect based on the scenarios that are available in this tool. You are also able to select the impact on an annual level, but you could also go into seasonal impact, so that's a temporal option you have here. And next one is the spatial aggregation method. We will use a population weighted average. The biggest difference is that if you could also use an area weighted average, which means you have your country, you have the resolution of your model, let's say it's 50 by 50, so you have a number of grid cells. Each of them will give you a certain temperature, and you just take the average across the area. What does a population weighted average do is consider the amount of people who are living in that area, which means that if you have 100 people that are exposed to a temperature of 20 degrees, and you have 500 people exposed to a temperature of 25 degrees, then it will multiply the number of people exposed to that temperature. Do that across your domain and sum it up, and then you will divide through the total amount of people living in that full area, which kind of gives you a more impact aspects, taking into account where people live and how they are exposed. So if you have an area with very high temperatures but nearly no one is living there, then within this population weighted average you're kind of taking into account for that. I will show an example with the heat stress study we've done for Africa next week to kind of show that it's a bit more clear. But so for this one we will select the population weighted average. And then for the city of Lisbon, so I looked into the annual mean temperature for these two scenarios. So we have the RCP 2.6 scenario and we have the RCP 8.5 scenario. We get the information about the baseline temperature we're starting from. So we have an annual mean temperature of 17.05 degrees for the reference period so end of 20th century. Now we see the increase in temperature year by year for the different climate change scenarios, including the uncertainty. It also gives a different coloring really, for this last period, because there are way more uncertainties related to that, and it's less certain how it will evolve. And I've compared the annual mean temperature with the annual daily max temperature. And what is, for example, here an interesting thing to see is if we look at the dot of the 2.5 degree warming world, then we see that the annual mean temperature in Lisbon has increased with approximately, let's say, 1.8 degrees. Well, if we look at the daily max temperature, we see an increase at this point of about 2 degrees. So we see a higher increase of our max temperatures compared to our annual mean temperature. So we will get a higher exposure to more extreme heat in this area compared to the general, so the average change. We could also look at daily max temperatures on annual level and then compare it to the summer daily max temperature, so to see if we have seasonal aspects playing their role, and whether in summer, and summer of course differs from the location you are at, how that might be impacted. I'll go a bit quicker over these so that we can finish to the part of the assignment. Also looked into precipitation and relative humidity, and that's it's linked also to what I've said earlier, that this Mediterranean area is expected to get drier over time, which is also something that you clearly see represented here. So we see by, let's say, 2060, in a worst case scenario, a reduction of the annual precipitation of about 15 to 15%. If we are in an optimistic scenario, then we still see the median a reduction that's already smaller, and we also see that depending on the model that is behind here, it might also still be a lower, or still be an increase in final. So we have quite some variation that needs to be taken into account, which also makes it sometimes hard to make decisions in how your urban area now should evolve. Relative humidity is rather stable, I would say, which also has to do with the fact that temperatures get hotter and the air can hold more moisture, so relatively both increase. I also looked into one more impact related aspect on the global level, which in this case is the land fraction annual exposed to wildfires. The tool gave me the message that in this case there is no baseline data because in observations it's not something that they consistently had tracked or had sufficient data on. So they start here around 2020 with about 0% in baseline, and then you see, okay, on a yearly basis, what is the percentage of land in this province, in this case, that gets exposed to wildfires. And in that regard, what I would like you to look into is for your country, and if possible, the province the city is located in, to look at the three temperature metrics, so the annual mean temperature, annual daily max temperature, and then the summer daily max temperature for the RCP 2.6 and RCP 8.5 scenario, and to do also look into annual precipitation and relative humidity for the same scenarios, and then to take one indicator of choice. So I would recommend you in that tool to actually play a bit around and look into different indicators and what it might bring you, and to think of an indicator that might be of interest for the region you are looking at. I can imagine that this is not really focused on heat. It's for certain areas it might be interesting to look at an indicator more related to cold weather. Might be interesting to look into precipitation and look into flooding, wildfires. Depends a bit on the area. So that's the question, to see what is most relevant for you. And then the second part is to look at the urban impact, for which we will use the climate risk dashboard. It's a bit of a like dashboard. You will see that it uses different climate change scenarios. That's also a bit of a challenge sometimes if you get data. It might look at future climates in a different perspective, so that makes it hard sometimes to compare. We will look at it apart, not to start getting into that issue. These are the cities that are included in the climate risk data dashboard. So I think for most of you, I think it should be fine to or find your own country, or find another your own city, or find a city within the country you are located. Let's see if that would not be possible. Might be good to already explore that by next week, and then we can see if there are issues, how we resolve them, and which city to be used. For Lisbon, I've looked into focus on urban heat stress here. I've looked into the days a year with a high heat stress. They quantify heat stress with the wet bulk low temperature, which actually takes into account impacts of temperature, radiation, and wind, and is an often used metric to link to heat stress, and then to also link to high heat stress, which comes down to heat stress where it gets dangerous for human health. So that's the first indicator. In this case, I've selected the 2020 climate policies scenario, which is a continuation of all climate policies that were in place in 2020, but we did not change anything, so we just impose that that's how it will go, which is a worst case scenario. And then we have a shifting pathway scenario, which aims at reaching the targets to reduce global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius, so that's the optimistic scenario in this case. This tool gives you, the other as well actually, but this one gives you quite refined impacts. For the city of Lisbon, for example, see if you look at the days of a high heat stress, you have this area popping up with lower amounts of days, which is linked to a park that is located in this place of the city and has a cooling effect, so there we see less days of high heat stress compared to really the city center. And you also see that difference pronunciated between the different scenarios here in the image. Here. Then I looked at the nights a year with a minimum temperature that goes above 20. Why did I do that? Because often it's not fully proven, but they are quite sure that there's an important link between night temperatures and how human bodies can cool down during the night and kind of recover from heat stress, and linked mortality and morbidity numbers. And then again, both scenarios, and you can visualize how it evolves across the city. And then the last one is to look at maximum temperatures during the day above 25 degrees, so which gives you the heat exposure during the day in scenario. I will come back to these more in detail to show you next week adaptation measures that they have taken into account for Lisbon. That's also why I opted for this one, to show you how more detailed you can use these data. And then the last one, and that's again one that I took more on impact-wise, I looked into cooling degree hours to have a bit of an estimate what it might mean for the cooling of the energy demand for cooling. To already give you an overview, so first of all, check whether your city is available and whether you might have a city nearby. If that would cause issues, just pass by next week and we can see which city will be best to use. And then in this tool, the aim is to look at the days of high heat stress, the nights with the temperatures above 20 degrees, and then days with maximum temperatures above 25 degrees. And again, to look at one indicator of your choice, I would again say with this tool, look at it, play a bit with it, look at if you see urban patterns that interest you, or if you have specific things in mind based on your background, what might be of use or what you might be interested in. That's the one to take into account. And that I would think we can conclude for the day, unless there would be questions you would have. Don't hesitate to come after to me if you would have questions. But if not, then I will see you next week. Have a nice day.
Yeah.